Welcome back to yet another episode of the Isobar, the highs and lows of meteorology. I am joined by my cohorts here. We've got Emily down in Chicago, chief meteorologist at Fox in Chicago, and Rich out in Detroit, chief meteorologist at Fox in Detroit. All around the Great Lakes, we are covered, and boy, do we have stuff to cover today. It has been a very busy 2 weeks since last we spoke. The heavens just opened up on us, and every droplet of water vapor ended up on the ground somewhere. So let's start right there. I know here, obviously, in Wisconsin, it has been an historic flooding event. Chicago got hit very hard, Emily.
Yeah, it really did in the last just couple of days. So over the weekend of August 16th, August 17th, the Chicago area, so our viewing area actually had 17 consecutive hours where we had thunderstorms rolling through. So that
Wow.
alone is very impressive. But unfortunately, a lot of these storms, they ended up training over the exact same areas. So just before we started this podcast, I actually went back over the last 4 to 5 days to see what have the totals actually been. So we're up between 7 and 10 inches of rainfall in some portions of the area. So, of course, we've been dealing with a lot of flooding. We've had flash flood warnings, one after the other. And to be honest with you, in my whole time in Chicago, which is coming up on only about 4 years, but I have never seen anything like this so consistently over the last couple of days, just flash flood warning, one after the other after the other. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of communities dealing with flooding in their basements, flooding of their homes, and it's a mess in a lot of portions of the area because of all of the rain. But it's a really similar weather pattern to what, we've been talking about really all summer. It seems like every time we get rain, we're getting these torrential downpours with it. We're not getting these all day, really nice light rains. We're getting flooding rainfall. And as we know too, that doesn't really help out with the drought conditions either because it all just runs off.
Yeah, it goes to places that aren't beneficial to, farmers and gardeners and everything. You're right, the drought, it really can be actually worsened by this too. And we can circle back to that in a bit. I want to get the breakdown from Rich on your side of Lake Michigan. Obviously, you've had round after round as well.
Yes, we've had quite a wet summer. However, we did not get the big flooding like you did in Chicago, like you did in Milwaukee. We didn't see it. There were some high water totals closer to Grand Rapids and around South Bend, but thankfully, they didn't come all the way into Southeast Michigan. So I suspect you two are going to be doing a lot more talking in the next 10 minutes than I'm going to be doing because I was watching it and I was thinking of both of you. I'm thinking, oh boy, they're busy. I mean, they're really busy. And there are these times when weather becomes news. And then it gets even busier for the meteorologist there. So I was thinking about you and I was rooting for both of you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Rich, and that's a really good point. It is when weather becomes news. We as broadcast meteorologists, we're always wearing two hats, right? Journalist and meteorologist, right? But that's when we're wearing two hats at the same time, and it gets to be quite a bit. I know on this side, for us, it started basically the weekend of the 9th and 10th. The skies just really started to open up and just downpours. Some spots in the Milwaukee metro area, southeastern Wisconsin, saw a double-digit rainfall. Much of that came down in a very short period of time, so significant flash flooding. Now, fortunately, we have yet to have a confirmed flood-related death with all of this going on, but the damage is astronomical and only going to keep climbing. But it wasn't just that one event. Then, of course, it stayed very active. Was we stayed, with those training thunderstorms that Emily was pointing out. We'd maybe get a day if we were lucky, maybe like 8, 10 hours where it would kind of settle down and dry out, and then it would fire right back up again. As recently as last night, we had flash flood warnings in parts of our viewing area down into Walworth and Rock counties, so getting down toward the Lake Geneva area, where 2 or 3 inches worth of rain fell in a very short period of time. And that, has become news, obviously. We have numerous folks around the area, thousands of people that have had to empty out their basements. One of the sights that you see as you drive around Milwaukee now are these massive piles of basement belongings, essentially. All the stuff you typically keep in the basement, boxes, old sofas, rec room stuff, TVs, all out at the curb, waiting to go into a landfill somewhere. So this flooding impact is not only a short-term pain, but it's also a long-term impact as well. And I know you've had similar in the past, if you haven't had it recently, Rich, but certainly down the road in Chicago as well. This brings to mind for me a whole other side of this story, which is kind of a re-education of our population about what flooding really can do and the impact that it can be. That not only is it a short-term situation, like we always want you to turn around, don't drown. We don't want any of the impact of the immediate, but it's not just in the here and now. It's weeks and months and years down the road. Like, Emily, how many folks are going to be filing flood insurance reports or trying to get money for things they may not be covered for?
Well, and unfortunately, that process is such a long process too, and you don't want all of that stuff and that dirty water and the
Mhm.
mold in your drywall downstairs if you have drywall, or even in the cinder blocks, whatever your basement looks like. When you go through insurance, it takes a while to get that approved. So if you're waiting on that money, then you could be dealing with the health impacts associated with that. So, we were actually just talking to a woman who her basement has flooded 3 times so far this summer, and she's still waiting on flood insurance to come through from the first round. So, it's something that it's difficult to keep up on, and it's expensive too. So if people are relying on that insurance money to come through before they can actually properly clean up the floodwaters or the damage left behind in their basements, or anywhere just in their home, there's health impacts that are going to be coming along with that, especially for people that are maybe have allergies to mold, or asthma sufferers, things like that. So it's a long road for people that end up dealing with flooding in their home.
Yeah, you really can't wait on these things. It has to be taken care of quickly. Mold spreads very, very quickly. Uh, Not trying to pry, but do either one of you typically carry flood insurance for your homes?
I don't, but I'm in a typical Chicago high rise. So
Yeah.
if waters are reaching my condo, then we are all in big trouble. So
We have much
fortunately for
bigger
me right
problems.
now, yeah, fortunately for me right now, that's not something that I do have to carry, but I did have to carry that when I lived in Michigan.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And Rich,
Yeah, Rob, I live in an older subdivision, in Oakland County, and I'm not really near. There is a small creek that comes through our subdivision, and I'm not really all that close to that creek. But what I do carry is a rider on my homeowner's policy about the water coming up the drain. It's
right,
it seems like people I know or friends or coworkers, it seems like every so often you'll get somebody who gets that, water up through the basement thing.
sure,
And that's, really sometimes it can be from a variety of reasons, but I think we're all frightened of that, that flood in our home. It's a
sure.
terrible thing. And I've had water in my basement from heavy rains, but I've never had anything, where I had to file a claim or get the sump pump, working overtime. Thankfully,
Right.
Rob.
But it just made me think, because there are those moments when you're going through and you're trying to trim the household budget. And you're thinking, oh, okay, well, if I don't have to carry flood insurance, then I'll pass. My current home, is nowhere near a flood, so I'm fine. But I have had previous homes where it was kind of like, well, I'm in the 500-year flood plain. And even as a meteorologist, I was like, oh, I don't know if we need that. And so I passed on it. Well, thankfully for me, was never a problem. As far as I know, it hasn't been a problem for the subsequent homeowners there. But we're talking about people in the Milwaukee area that were in a 500-year floodplain, even in a 1,000-year floodplain, that are now trying to figure out how they possibly pay for all this damage. So I think it's opening up a lot of people's eyes, in the public and probably in the insurance business.
Yeah, I think so too. And it really is something that we have to think about going forward, because we always talk about whenever we're, talking about global warming or climate change, things like that. Some of these events, they seem to be happening a little more frequently than 500 years, 1,000
Mhm.
years.
Right.
So when it comes to insurance claims and insurance companies, this is something that really needs to be addressed.
Right. I think you're right. I think there's also a misunderstanding. Obviously, we all understand what that 500-year or 1,000-year definition is, but I think the general public far too often takes it literally, where it's just an expression of a percentage chance. Somebody thinks, well, 500 years, we should be good, but that's not really how it plays out. So obviously, this is going to open up a few eyes. We're on track here in southern Wisconsin for potentially the wettest August on record. We're really not even two-thirds of of the way through. So we'll have to be watching very closely. Now, earlier, Emily, you talked about, drought conditions, had a fascinating talk, and we'll have to have Shell on the show. He works for Climate Central and is a climatologist, meteorologist as well. And we had a really good conversation about how this greedy atmosphere, this warmer atmosphere that we're now living in, is, holding more moisture, but it's also demanding more moisture. And while it's soaking places like Chicago, Milwaukee, parts of Michigan as well, it's actually pulling moisture out of the soil in the Pacific Northwest. It's worsening the drought.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think
Fascinating.
we're, on a learning curve for. All right, so as we continue to think about all the folks who are dealing with their basement floods, and we wish them all well, and we hope they get as much help as they can. The politics are going to be part of this as FEMA potentially gets involved as well. We also have to kind of pivot to talk about the wind because while it was pouring rain, we also had some dramatic wind events. You had a microburst down in Chicago.
That's right. So in one of our suburbs called Mount Prospect, there was a 100 unit apartment building that was holding roughly 200 residents are now without a home because we had a microburst take place over the weekend on Saturday the 16th, and there were 70-mile-per-hour winds, but it actually ripped off the roof of this 4-story apartment building, just completely exposing that whole top floor. So unfortunately, there's a long road ahead for those folks as well because the entire building needs to be, checked out and then redone. There needs to be a new roof that's entirely built. But fortunately, with that, no injuries were coming through. And fortunately, I can't believe that that's the case, right? The
Right.
entire roof of this building was ripped off. I can't believe there weren't any injuries. There we go. So wonderful news there. But, even the debris field around there was just massive with all of the debris, the shingles, multiple cars were impacted in the parking lot surrounding that building. So it was a very active weekend around the Chicago suburbs, but I think the hardest hit area really was Mount Prospect, and that's where we had that roof just entirely blown off because of 70-mile-per-hour winds.
Right, and the video was fantastic. I saw the coverage that your station did, and we'll insert some of that video here into this podcast as well. And it really, opens up your eyes to the power of straight line winds. While tornadic winds and tornadoes kind of grab all the headlines, things like microbursts and straight line events can be brutal as well. Rich, I believe a couple of episodes back, you were kind of saying, "Look, it's not a very busy, very active pattern." Did we jinx it for you over in Michigan?
Well, no, no, just the opposite. Our weather has been pretty quiet, and something that we brought up a couple of episodes ago about, when there's severe weather in another market, there is a bit of relief that, thankfully it's not in our market, it's somewhere else. But that's never really a great feeling because, when I see, very active weather in Milwaukee or in Chicago or in Buffalo, I'm thinking about those people and those meteorologists who are working double and triple time. But I want to revisit something both of you mentioned, about these flooding events. Um, what's interesting to me is how floods take on different shapes. Of course, we have, the storm surge floods with landfalling tropical systems, and we have the great river floods of the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers. And then we have these events in Texas, some 5, 6 weeks ago. And then we have these urban events, that just took place up your way. It's it's all flooding, but it's completely different. The nature of it and how it develops and how it progresses. It's fascinating, but it is devastating to watch the results of Mother Nature really turning on the spigots. It's really devastating.
Yeah, oh, no, it's a really good point. I think there's something there we can dig into a little bit. The different types, obviously we have different types of flood warnings as well, flash flood warnings, aerial flood warnings, and then the river flood warnings. And Rich, as you point out, that's an entirely different thing because that's not always happening in real time. We have seen our river flood warnings here in Wisconsin travel down the river. They started off in the north where we had the double-digit rainfall in one day, and now it's slowly working its way down toward the state line.
It's interesting how, water moves downhill, obviously, but it can take days, weeks, sometimes months, for these great crests to travel. And I don't know. It's always something I've been interested in, even way back in my Penn State days. I took some classes in hydrometeorology. It is very, very interesting, but devastating nonetheless.
Sure. Yeah, I remember when I was, younger and doing my early part of the career there, the Red River floods, that was a pretty popular one. And one of the phrases that meteorologists at that time were focused on was a slow motion disaster, because it just takes days, as you said, maybe times weeks and months for that to crest and all of the damage and everything downstream. That's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, speaking of water, all of the water that we're talking about, all this flooding has to go somewhere. It does go down the rivers and streams, and it ends up in our case, the Great Lakes in many cases, or Lake St. Clair, part of the Great Lakes system. And to paraphrase Seinfeld, the inland seas were angry that day, my friend. The Lake Michigan has had so many beach hazard warnings, beach hazard statements. The whole Great Lakes chain has just been incredibly active with high winds and rip currents. We are just currently under a beach hazard statement. In the last several days, we've been under one. We'll continue to be one over the next few days, in part because of the high waves, but also because of the rip currents. I know it's the same down the shoreline in Chicago.
Yeah, of course. So, we just had a cold front move through. Today is the 19th and we're going into the 20th, and we actually have a beach hazard statement that's staying in effect all the way until the 21st because of the wind direction that's going to be playing a really large role. So we're getting that northerly wind, so we're getting those higher waves crashing upon our shores in northeastern Illinois, also northern Indiana, and it looks like at this point some of the higher waves that we're likely to see is about 3 to 6 feet. And, something that I think that a lot of people think about when they think of 3 to 6 foot waves, I think if you're not familiar with the Great Lakes, which a lot of us and the people that we're speaking to on this podcast, they are because we live near the Great Lakes. But a lot of people, I think, if you compare that to the ocean, it doesn't seem so high, right? But
Sure.
it really is when you're talking about the rip currents that come along with that, because the stronger that the waves are coming onshore, the stronger that that undertow is going to be pulling you away when that water's going back out to sea. So it's just that's something that we preach a lot being along the lakefront is stay out of the water, stay dry when waves are high, right? But in the Chicago area too, we have several piers, especially Navy Pier, that's the most notable one, but you can also get those fast running currents right along those piers, and a lot of people like to jump off and go swimming. It's a really convenient spot to access the lake, and sometimes those are the most dangerous areas.
Yeah, I think the power of the Great Lakes system is vastly underestimated sometimes. We've had some tragic stories here in the Milwaukee area as well. And of course, Michigan, Mitch, you guys are surrounded, right? Obviously, we've got even more hazards around your area.
We, I mean, we do all too many, rescue stories. And just a few weeks ago, there was the Coast Guard helicopters out of Station Mount Clemens at Selfridge Air National Guard Base. They went to the islands in Lake Erie, near Put-in Bay, near Kelly's Island, and they did an early morning rescue of boaters that got into trouble. We do those stories, it seems like way too frequently,
Right.
And as you both know, I mean, the history of the Great Lakes and the great storms and drownings and great ships that have gotten into a lot of trouble go back hundreds and hundreds of years. And, we do have all this great surveillance of the atmosphere with radar and with satellite, but sometimes it just takes common sense to stay out of the water.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, but it can be very tough. And the lakes are so attractive, as Emily, you pointed out. It's such a great part of summer in the Great Lakes area, but it's just so important to stay out of the lakes. And, kind of tying these two topics together, all the flood water flowing into our area beaches, the safety of that water quality right now is very low. I know I'm not sure how it works in Chicago or in Detroit specifically, but here in Milwaukee, the sewers district at times has to open up the sewer gates and let it flow out into the rivers and into the lake because it can only hold so much. That keeps it from backing up and living Rich's nightmare of things backing up into your basement. But it also means the water quality is very, very low. And that is, just a really big problem because it can lead to a lot of sickness and disease.
Yeah, and in the Chicago area, so our Chicago River, the flow was actually reversed. So it used to flow out into Lake Michigan, but thanks to modern engineering, it now flows from Lake Michigan down toward the Mississippi. So when that happens, fortunately, most of the time, we're still able to keep the water flowing from the lake toward the Mississippi. But then, I mean, that's just transferring it from our problem to somebody else's problem, right? So we're taking it away
Right.
from our area, but it's still either way, it's making its way to the Mississippi. But in very extreme events, at times they will reverse the flow back out to Lake Michigan. So it's a lock system that we have. And when there's ongoing flooding and if things are getting really bad in the downtown area immediately surrounding the Chicago River, we are able to send that out to Lake Michigan.
Rob, Lake St. Clair, which is in the Great Lakes system, is notorious for, certain beaches developing high bacteria count. And of course, they close the beaches. And, we're at towards the end of August now. I mean, Labor Day is less than 2 weeks away. So, to have the high bacteria count on some of these last weekends in August, it's tough. It's tough. Now, there are other places to go. You can go, inland away from the Great Lakes system. But it's a big problem, I think, for many of the urban areas in the Great Lakes, what to do with all the stormwater. I think invariably it ends up in the Great Lakes, and it's not a good thing. There's no
Yeah.
simple fix there, but it's still not a good thing.
No, anyway, we have learned enough over the years that you can't just flush your problem down the river or down out into the lake. As Emily said, you're just giving it to someone else to deal with. So we'll have to, I guess, in the years and weeks and months and decades ahead, figure something a bit better out. But in the meantime, we just have to be very, very careful. And a good point, Rich. I mean, this is the worst possible time for the beaches to not be as beautiful as they are. And I've seen the beaches in Lake St. Clair, and they're stunning.
There's some beauties out there, and Emily, I know you're from this area, so you've hit the good swimming spots in Southeast Michigan, and there are many of them. In fact, last Friday I was up on the St. Clair River, right in St. Clair by the old St. Clair Inn, and I was swimming and having a wonderful time. I've been swimming in that same spot for years, and this was the first year I can remember when I jumped in, I didn't get that shock of colder water. I mean, it was still refreshingly cool, but it seemed warmer this year than it has in the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. It didn't have that polar plunge vibe as it often
It
does.
didn't. It usually does,
Hmm.
but not this year. So I'm hopefully going to get up there at least once or two more times before, through mid-September and get some good swimming in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
the
you
lake
go.
waters are gorgeous around here too. I was just swimming in Lake Michigan this past weekend, mid 70s. Can't go wrong. It was gorgeous. It was really nice, like you said, to not have that shock when you jump in.
Yeah, for sure. And I got one more lake to go, but I've had a swim in all the Great Lakes except Lake Superior, even Georgian Bay. So we'll take that as like a bonus point. And of course, Lake St. Clair. And never have I gotten in and thought, ooh, bathwater. Even shallow Lake Erie, which does warm up a bit more than the others. When I lived in Turkey Point, which is on the north shore of Lake Ontario, or Lake Erie rather, that still wasn't exactly warm water. But it is warming up. And as you said, that is an interesting phenomenon on top of everything else we've got going on. Speaking of warm water, it is one of the key ingredients to hurricane development. And here we go. We've been talking about the tropics for the last few episodes. We finally have our first major hurricane. Aaron has been making headlines, even as a system that is really well out to sea, but still having a pretty big impact throughout parts of the Caribbean and even here in the US, the mid-Atlantic, still dealing with this.
Yeah, that's right. So things are really starting to get rocking and rolling when it comes to our Atlantic season now. So that's very typical. Mid to late August, you start to see those storms kind of one after the other, at least have the potential of becoming a tropical cyclone. And with Aaron, it so quickly went from a tropical storm to a Cat 5 over the weekend of the 16th to the 17th. So it was at a Cat 5 very, very briefly, just a couple hours. And then it eventually went back down to a Cat 4. And today, as of the 19th, it is a Cat 2, which so yes, it's reduced its strength as far as wind speed goes, but the wind field is growing, meaning that those tropical storm force winds they're expanding in their spatial the area that they take up. So because of that, places like North Carolina, Virginia, while we're not looking at a direct hit from Aaron, by the middle of this week, we're going to start to feel those tropical storm force winds. So there's tropical storm warnings and watches that have gone into effect in North Carolina as well as Virginia because of this.
Rob, I'm going to be in the Outer Banks later this week. So I made vacation plans, 6, 8 weeks ago to go to Kitty Hawk uh, at the end of the week. So this next go around, when I see both of you in a couple of weeks, I'll have perhaps some stories. Now, it
Just
looks
bring some
like,
pictures and videos, please.
oh, okay, I will.
Yeah.
It looks like that the day before I arrive is when, the strongest winds will be for the Outer Banks. It looks like Thursday. So when I get there Friday, I'm sure there'll still be some, fringe effects, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm a big aviation enthusiast, so I was at the Kitty Hawk Memorial years and years ago, and so I'm looking forward to going there again. In fact, wait a minute. Wait a minute. The book the book that I'm reading right now in preparation is David McCullough's Wright Brothers.
How
So,
fascinating.
yeah, I'm reading this book in anticipation of my trip, but obviously, both of you know, I mean, the Outer Banks, there's some crazy weather out there, throughout the year, with the nor'easters and with the hurricanes and the tropical systems. And so I'll give you a field report in a couple weeks.
We would love that. Yes, bring pictures and then give us the book report. Maybe we'll have to
Okay.
start that as a new segment here on the Isobar. What book am I reading now? Just to pick our little nerdy brains. But exactly, the Mid-Atlantic. You brought up the wind, Emily. Also, the incredible impact on the surf there. I'm sure you've all seen the video of the houses coming down.
Yeah, it's wild. Anytime you see videos like that too, it seems like it's a movie, right? It
Right.
doesn't seem like that like it's real. But unfortunately, that's you hate to say it's a risk you take living right on the coast because you never want to see that happening, but that is something that you always have to have in the back of your mind. But regardless, it's devastating for folks that live along the coasts.
Right. And this is from a storm that is well out into the Atlantic. So the impacts, had it tracked farther to the
Mhm.
west and been a little bit more, in toward the land side there, would have been even more devastating. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a risk you kind of take when you have the privilege of owning a home like that. But the video, it's fascinating to watch. Again, almost in slow motion, like you're watching some sort of movie effect or AI in this day and age. And it just shows you how the power of a system that's miles and miles and miles away can still reach out with those big wind fields, like you said, and the incredible surge and the massive waves tied to these things. All right, well, we tend to wrap these up with some more upbeat stuff. So I kind of was looking around, just, what can we talk about? What can we talk about? And just stumbled onto a great article about the migration of the monarch butterfly, which begins in mid-August. And I stumbled onto it and thought, there's got to be a weather angle here. There's a massive weather angle here. These things are little meteorologists in and of themselves. They actually have a part of their bodies that helps them kind of read temperatures and determine temperatures because they are delicate. I'm sure you've all seen a monarch butterfly. So they need to find little microclimates on their journey as they continue to move down toward Mexico for the winter. They need certain temperature ranges just to maintain, their species and to continue to thrive and expand and replicate. And it's also something they use for timing. It's fascinating to me how the insect world in particular, because I'm sure you guys know the story about crickets and temperatures, excuse me, crickets and temperatures, and many other bugs, the old myth about the woolly bear caterpillar. But it is amazing to me how in tune the animal and insect world is to the atmosphere.
Yeah, and before we started talking about this, I actually did a lot of research on monarchs because, to be honest with you, it was not my field house. It's not something that I knew a lot of.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's, as you were mentioning, it's so interesting just how in tune that they are with the weather, with climate. But the interesting thing is the monarchs that we're seeing flying around, here in the Great Lakes region, typically they only live for a few weeks as an adult. So it's like that last generation of the summer that actually makes this migration south. And then once they get south, they're able to live for 6 to 9 months. And those are the butterflies that come back. So it's just, I was so blown away by that because, if they stay here, it's only a few weeks that they get to be an adult. But if they go to
Right.
Mexico or go south, it's 6 to 9 months. And that's such a huge difference. I just found that really interesting.
That is fascinating.
I have a butterfly story.
Oh, good.
Uh, when my daughters were young, I mean they're 25 now, but when they were, 8, 9, 10, we enrolled them in like soccer camp, for the summer. And my one daughter was athletically inclined, but my other daughter not so much. And I remember watching this daughter of mine who's not athletically inclined, and she was on the soccer field, and we're yelling, chase the ball, run, she's running after the ball. And then as she was running towards the ball, a butterfly came across. And she is a deep thinker, this one. And she just changed her whole direction and she followed this butterfly into the woods, part of the field. And it's a memory I'll never forget. I knew that she was never going to be an Olympic soccer player, but she is a very, very smart young lady who does many things with her brain. So there you go. There's the Luderman butterfly story.
It's your butterfly story. I love that. And it just shows how kids are always very much in the moment. They are our future, as we say. And they're definitely the future of our science as well. So whether they're chasing bugs or want to, check out the history of flight down in Kitty Hawk, we got to encourage that, right?
Amen.
Absolutely.
More reading for sure about anything that floats your boat. Whether it's aviation or weather or the Great Lakes or Emily, you just mentioned how they engineered the Chicago River to move that way to improve the water quality of Lake Michigan 120 years ago. It's fascinating. So yeah, get the kids reading about all of those goodies.
hmm I like to tease my kids and say, talk nerdy to me. And we get deep into some of these topics. And they all have their own little nerdy side, like you said, Rich. They've got their own brains that do their own things. Although you did bring back some wonderful memories of 5-year-old soccer. It's
Oh yeah.
it's we called it herd ball. It was just a herd of kids cluttered around the
That's
ball.
right.
That's half the
Good
fun.
days.
Thank you guys again for taking some time to sit down with me and talk weather, the highs and lows of meteorology. We call it the Isobar. We'll pick it up again in 2 weeks. And until then, thank you.